To me personally, one of the most impressive achievements for a quarterback is to throw for 7 touchdowns in a single game. I mean, in most of the games that you watch, it's pretty difficult for an entire team to even put up 7 touchdowns against an NFL defense, let alone get 7 scores through the air. Throughout the over 100-year history of the NFL, only 8 quarterbacks have been able to pull off this feat. Today we're breaking down who each of these quarterbacks are and how they accomplished it. The first instance of a quarterback throwing for 7 touchdowns takes us all the way back to the 1943 season when Sid Luckman did so as a member of the Bears. Luckman was an extremely versatile player who throughout his career spent time playing the running back and defensive back positions along with quarterback. Throughout the 1943 season, Luckman was playing at an extremely high level for a quarterback in this era, but his performances leading up to week 9 paled in comparison to what he had in store for the Giants. The Bears came into this game with an incredible 6-0-1 record, while the Giants, not so much. They were struggling to a 2-2-1 record. Luckman got the game off to a hot start, throwing for 2 touchdowns in only the first quarter. The first going to Jim Benton for a 4-yard score, while the second was pulled in by Connie McBarry for 31 yards. While the Giants were able to respond with the passing touchdown of their own to open up the second quarter, it didn't take long for Luckman to find Hampton Poole for a 27-yard score. Heading into halftime, the Bears held a commanding 28-7 lead. However, they kept their foot on the gas in the second half as well. In the third quarter, Luckman hit Harry Clark for a 62-yard touchdown before finding Jim Benton for his second touchdown grab of the game, this one from 15 yards out. Even though the Bears were up 42-7 at this point in time, heading into the fourth quarter, the air raid continued. Luckman threw an additional 2 touchdowns in the fourth, finding George Wilson for a 3-yard score, and finally Hampton Poole getting his second touchdown of that game, this time from 40 yards out. By the time the game was over, Chicago held a dominating 56-7 lead, earning their 7th win of the year and keeping their no-loss season alive. Luckman filled up the stat sheet in this one, completing 65.6% of his passes for 433 yards, 7 touchdowns, and just 1 interception. Luckman went on to have an incredible season, by the way, highlighted, of course, by this game. He finished out the regular season with 2,194 yards and 28 touchdowns through the air, leading the league in both metrics and earning himself a spot on the All-Pro first team, all in just 10 games. The Bears also beat the Redskins in the championship that year 41-21, and Sid Luckman had a game to remember: 286 yards through the air, 5 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. Next up, we're going to jump to the 1954 season to take a look at Adrian Burke. Leading up to this season, Burke had mainly served as a backup quarterback, only starting in every game that he played in during one of the 4 seasons that he'd been in the league. However, he did begin the 1954 season as the starting QB of the Eagles. Leading up to week 4 when the Eagles took on the Redskins, he had Philadelphia off to a hot 3-0 start. On the flip side, Washington did not get off to a hot start, failing to even win a single game heading into week number 4. Philly took full advantage of this mismatch, with Burke finding Bobby Walston on a 26-yard pass for the first score of that game. However, Washington quickly responded with a touchdown of their own, knotting the score up at 7-all to end the first quarter. Burke and the Eagles controlled the second quarter though, with him finding Pete Pihos for both scores in that quarter. The first touchdown was from 18 yards out, while the second was from 19. Heading into halftime, the Eagles found themselves up 21-7, and early in the third, Burke kept up his dominant day through the air, finding Bobby Walston for his second touchdown reception of that day, this one from 5 yards out. While Washington returned a kickoff following this score, Burke led Philadelphia down the field and once again hit Bobby Walston for his 3rd touchdown of that day, this one from 4 yards out. Heading into the fourth quarter, the Eagles found themselves up 35-14. Burke kept his foot on the gas and continued the passing raid, throwing for 2 more touchdowns before the final whistle had sounded. On the first score, he hit Toy Ledbetter for a 9-yard touchdown, while Pete Pihos caught his final touchdown of that game, his 3rd of the day. Philadelphia came out with a dominant victory by a final score of 49-21. Burke finished the contest with 242 yards, 7 touchdowns, and just 1 interception on only 27 pass attempts. Shockingly, not even this performance was enough to keep his starting position safe for the season. He was benched in weeks 7 through 10 before taking over once again in the starting role for week 11. Even though he spent some time coming off the bench that year, Burke still finished the season with 1,740 yards and 23 touchdowns, leading the league in passing touchdowns and earning himself a spot in the Pro Bowl. Ladies and gentlemen, the NFL preseason is officially underway, and I cannot wait for this regular season to begin. Of course, one of the main reasons I'm so excited is fantasy football, but other than that, I'm excited to go see some games in person, which is why I need to tell you about our special hookup from today's sponsor, SeatGeek. SeatGeek is an app and a website where you can buy and sell tickets for live sports, concerts, and theater events. This is going to work out perfectly for all you NFL lovers because they find you some amazing deals in just seconds. It saves you so much time comparing a bunch of different prices because it tells you immediately if you have a great deal on your hands. Everybody can use my new code FANTASYPHENOMS10 for 10% off any tickets on SeatGeek, whether you're a new customer or not. So take out your phone, open the SeatGeek app, and add code FANTASYPHENOMS10 to your account. I think it's really a no-brainer. I don't know what you guys are waiting for over here. You got to do it now because this offer is only available for a limited time. I want to give a huge shout out to SeatGeek for sponsoring today's video. Now we move on to the 1961 season to cover one of the most interesting quarterbacks from this era, George Blanda. Blanda saw an immense amount of individual success as a member of the Houston Oilers and was a player who was far ahead of his time. Arguably the best game from his 7 seasons with the team came in Week 11 when the Houston Oilers took on the New York Titans. Coming into this matchup, the Oilers posted a record of 5-3-1 while the Titans were attempting to keep their heads above water at 5-4. Blanda kicked off this game completely locked in, throwing 3 touchdown passes in only the first quarter. The first score was off a 28-yard touchdown pass to Charlie Hennigan, while Billy Cannon pulled in the final 2 touchdowns of that quarter, the first being 6 yards and the second on a 78-yard touchdown. While the Titans responded with a touchdown pass of their own to open up the second quarter, Blanda threw for an additional 2 touchdown passes. Billy Groman was on the receiving end of a 66-yard dart for the first score, while Cannon caught his 3rd touchdown of that game, this one from 6 yards out. Heading to the half, Houston held a commanding 35-6 lead. In the second half, Groman pulled in his 2nd and 3rd touchdowns of that game, the first from 46 yards and the second from 11. This wound up being Blanda's final touchdown pass of that game and the Oilers' final score. They came out on top by a final score of 49-13. Blanda picked the Titans apart in this one, throwing for 418 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 1 interception on 32 pass attempts. Despite only starting in 11 games during the 1961 season, Blanda finished the regular season throwing for 3,330 yards, 36 touchdowns, and 22 interceptions, leading the league in both passing yards and passing touchdowns. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl on the All-Pro First Team, and he was named AFL Player of the Year. Interestingly, Blanda continued to serve as a starting quarterback in the NFL until he was 48 years old. It's pretty unlikely that we're ever going to see another player continue to perform at an NFL level for this long ever again. Similar to Sid Luckman, the Houston Oilers also took home the championship this year that Blanda threw for 7 touchdowns. It was a very ugly game to say the least. The Oilers came out on top against the San Diego Chargers 10-3. George Blanda had 5 interceptions in that game, and on the opposite side of the ball, Jack Kemp had 4 interceptions in that game. Kemp throwing for 0 touchdowns, Blanda throwing for the only touchdown of that game. 1 year later, another quarterback would rise to the occasion and throw for 7 touchdowns in a single game, that player being Y.A. Tittle. Tittle was a starter for the Giants and gave fans a game to remember when they took on the Redskins in week number 7. Both sides were evenly matched heading into this one, with the Giants with a 4-2 record while Washington was 4-0-2. Washington's quarterback Norm Snead opened up the game with a 44-yard touchdown to Bobby Mitchell. However, Tittle and the Giants quickly responded with a 22-yard touchdown of their own from Tittle to Joe Morrison. Heading into the second quarter, the game was tied at 7-all, and both quarterbacks went back and forth throughout the first half, and heading into halftime, the Giants held a narrow 21-13 lead. But after a quick score from the Redskins to open up the second half, New York completely took off. Tittle went unconscious, throwing for 4 unanswered touchdowns, 1 to Del Schaffner for 53 yards, 1 to Frank Gifford for 63 yards, and 2 to Joe Walton for 26 and 6 yards. After this scoring outburst, the Giants were up 49-20, and the game was completely out of reach for Washington. While the Redskins were able to close out the game with 2 unanswered touchdowns of their own, the Giants still comfortably won this one 49-34. Snead had a very respectable game, throwing for 346 yards and 4 touchdowns. However, even this incredible showing was nothing in comparison to Tittle, who posted 505 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. Tittle continued to shine throughout the remainder of the regular season, also finishing his 1962 campaign with 3,224 yards, 33 touchdowns, and 20 interceptions, leading the league in passing touchdowns. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl on the All-Pro First Team, and he came in second place in the MVP voting, just behind Packers fullback Jim Taylor. On to the 1969 season now. I think we're going to cover the least known quarterback on this list, Joe Kapp. Kapp was a very streaky player, and coming into every week, you didn't know exactly which version of him you were going to get. While he showed flashes of being a player who could develop into a great player, he also had his fair share of games in which he looked completely unstartable. However, his first appearance of the 1969 season as a starter for the Vikings was one of the greatest single-game performances that we have ever seen from a quarterback. Both the Vikings and the Colts came into this game with a 0-1 record, and Minnesota was even 2-point underdogs coming into this one. They did come out of the gates hot though because of their quarterback. By the end of the first quarter, he had already had 2 touchdowns under his belt, the first an 18-yard dot to Dave Osborne, while the second was an 83-yard bomb to Gene Washington. While the Colts opened up the second quarter with a passing touchdown of their own, Kapp and the Vikings offense went back to work. Kapp threw for 2 more touchdowns in the second quarter, the first a 21-yard touchdown to Bob Grimm, while Kent Kramer pulled in the second from 13 yards out. Along with this, Fred Cox also knocked down a 40-yard field goal for Minnesota. So heading into the half, the Vikings held a commanding 31-7 lead. They were far from done at that point in time though. They kept their foot on the gas heading out of the locker room, where Gene Washington pulled in his second touchdown, this one from 42 yards. Minnesota also put the nail in the coffin late in the third and in the fourth, with Kapp throwing 2 more touchdowns, the first a 1-yard pass to John Beasley, and Jim Lindsey scoring the final touchdown of the game from 15 yards out. Minnesota ran an absolute track meet, scoring a crazy 52 points to Baltimore's 14. Even though he took on Johnny Unitas, Kapp was clearly the better quarterback on this day, throwing for 449 yards, 7 touchdowns, and just 1 interception to Unitas' 68 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Kapp finished that season with 1,726 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions, while leading the Vikings to a very impressive 12-1 record as a starter. He earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl and finished in second in MVP voting, only behind Los Angeles Rams quarterback Roman Gabriel. Interestingly, Kapp didn't play his first NFL game until the age of 29, and he had his 7-touchdown game to remember at the age of 31. He only played 1 more season following this 7-touchdown performance before eventually retiring from the league. All right, now we're going to get into some more recent players. There was a long stretch of time before another player would reach that 7-touchdown mark in a single game, and despite being 37 years old in the 2013 season, Peyton Manning was still at the top of his game. He started off this season on a great note in the Broncos season opener against the Ravens. Baltimore was coming off a Super Bowl winning season. However, Manning gave them a huge wake-up call. While the Ravens kicked off this game with the only score of the first quarter on a 2-yard touchdown pass from Joe Flacco to Vontae Leach, Manning and the Broncos responded early in the second. Manning found Julius Thomas for a 24-yard touchdown, and while this was a very back-and-forth game throughout the first half, with the two teams swapping scores, heading into halftime, the Ravens were up 17-14. But Manning took over in the third quarter. First, he found Andre Caldwell for a 28-yard score before Wes Welker pulled in back-to-back touchdowns from 5 and 2 yards out. This run continued into the fourth quarter, where he hit Demaryius Thomas for a 26-yard touchdown. While the Ravens scored 10 unanswered points, Manning sealed the game with his 7th touchdown pass of that game, finding Demaryius Thomas once again, this time from 78 yards out. Denver took this game by a final score of 49-27, establishing establishing themselves as a real threat in the AFC. Manning threw for 462 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions, an insane performance, especially for a 37-year-old. He continued to torch the league throughout the entirety of that season, throwing for 5,477 yards, 55 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions, leading the league in both passing yards and passing touchdowns. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl, on the All-Pro First Team, and he took home both the Offensive Player of the Year and MVP awards. Manning only ended up playing 2 more seasons following this historic performance. Oh, and by the way, if you didn't already know this, Manning still holds the record for most passing yards in a single season during that 2013 year, with that 5,477-yard performance. Now, this next player we're going to talk about, I know a lot of you hardcore football fans are going to know about this one. In week number 9, when the Eagles took on the Oakland Raiders in the 2013 season, Nick Foles threw for 7 touchdowns. Foles was only in his second year in the league, and this was only his 3rd start of the season. However, he absolutely cooked the Raiders on this day. He started off the game with a 2-yard find of Brent Selleck, and after a 24-yard field goal from Sebastian Janikowski to close out the first quarter, Foles and the Eagles found another gear in the passing game. He found Riley Cooper for back-to-back touchdown receptions, the first from 17 yards and the second from 63 yards. While the Raiders responded with a touchdown of their own, Foles quickly bounced back with a 15-yard dot to Zach Ertz. After another kick from Janikowski, the Eagles entered the locker room up 28-13, but they were not going to let up in the second half either. While the Raiders scored the final touchdown of that game late in the 4th, the game was already well over at this point, and the Eagles came out on top by a final score of 49-20. Seemingly out of nowhere, Nick Foles had the NFL world on the edge of their seats, throwing for 406 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. This game alone earned him the starting spot for Philly for the remainder of the season, and he finished the regular season with 2,891 yards, 27 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, leading the league with a 8.5% touchdown percentage. This earned him a spot in the Pro Bowl, which was the only appearance of his career, and later down the line, as many of you guys also will know, Nick Foles led the Eagles to a Super Bowl victory against none other than Tom Brady and the Patriots. The Philly special. We love Nick Foles around here. As an Eagles fan, gotta respect Nick Foles for bringing home the championship. Rounding out this list today, we're gonna jump to the 2015 season for a game between the Saints and the Giants in week number 8. Despite being 36 years old, Drew Brees could not be stopped through the air. Even though he was playing at a high level, the Saints were struggling to a 3-4 record, while the Giants were just 4-3. This was a duel between Brees and Eli Manning, with both veteran quarterbacks playing at a high level. Manning began the game with a 2-yard find to Odell Beckham Jr. However, Brees responded with 2 touchdown passes of his own to close out the first quarter. The first to Willie Snead for 34 yards, while the second was a 26-yard touchdown to Brandon Cooks. The second quarter played out in a very similar fashion, with Manning once again finding Odell Beckham Jr. in the red zone, then Brees responding with 2 touchdowns of his own. However, this time Manning closed out the quarter with another 2-yard touchdown to Shane Vereen. Sticking to their game plan, Odell scored the first touchdown on third, this time from 50 yards out, and then Brees threw for 2 more scores to end this quarter. Things shook out differently in the fourth, though. The Giants scored 3 unanswered touchdowns, Manning finding Dwayne Harris for 2 straight touchdowns, one from 9 yards out and the second from 20. Then Tremaine McBride picked off Brees and returned it for a 63-yard touchdown. Brees responded well by finding CJ Spiller for a 9-yard touchdown to tie the game at 49 all, with only 36 seconds left in the game. As time expired, Kai Forbath nailed a 50-yard field goal to win the game for New Orleans 52-49. While Manning ended the game with a loss, he still posted a very impressive 350 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. However, he was slightly one-upped by Drew Brees, both on the scoreboard and on the stat sheet, while he recorded an insane 505 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Brees finished that season with 4,870 yards, 32 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions, leading the league in passing yards. Despite this, the Saints struggled to a 7-8 record with Brees as a starter, and he even failed to make the Pro Bowl that year. It's really surprising that the final 7-touchdown game came nearly a decade ago, with the immense amount of talent that we've seen at the quarterback position since Brees. I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. As always, who is going to be the next quarterback to throw for 7 touchdowns in a single game?